nations. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. I thank you for the time, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, last week we marked the 50th anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, which began to pave the way for many of the programs that provide basic human dignity that every American deserves. 50 years ago, this Congress began to work together on the war against poverty. Unfortunately, today, some of my Republican colleagues have led a different kind of war. Instead of a war on poverty, to eliminate the war on poverty, it has grown into a shameful war against those living in poverty. These attacks are numerous, from slashing nutrition assistance to cutting unemployment insurance to attacking Social Security, Medicare, and attempting to dismantle health care. Fighting the war on poverty should not be a Democratic or a Republican idea. Not only are we all in this together, but poverty does not discriminate between political parties. According to the Brookings Institute, there are more than 21 million people living in poverty who live in Republican congressional districts. Equally, there are over 21 million people living in poverty in Democratic congressional districts. So the burden is on both parties equally to recommit ourselves to creating solutions. The gap between the rich and poor is wide, and it is growing at an alarming rate. Nowhere is this more true than in my home state of New Jersey. In my district alone, the number of households at the top 1% have doubled, while the poverty rate has grown to 28%. This is no way for the world's greatest country to lead. We can do better, and we must do better. We must return to the values that have always and will make this country great. We must make investments in education and job training, because how can a man find work if he does not have the skills to enter the workforce? We must make investments in nutrition assistance, because how can a child learn if he or she is too hungry to focus? We must make investments in health care, because how can a mother provide for her children if she can't afford to pay her medical bills? And most importantly, we must make investments in our fellow Americans to provide them with the opportunities to fulfill their own potential. My colleagues focus a discouraging amount of energy on cutting the very safety net programs that have lifted millions out of poverty, both in our urban centers and our rural areas. But these programs work. Without our safety net programs, poverty numbers would be double. So although there is still much more to do, we have come a long way. Turning our backs on the millions of Americans living in poverty is simply not an option. Nothing is more important to the people I represent in New Jersey than having a decent job that pays a decent wage. My Republican colleagues are kidding themselves if they think these people are lazy or content. Believe me, no one is content living in poverty. No one. These people want to work. They want economic security. And more than anything, they want to create a better life, not only for themselves, but for their children, so that they can forever be free from the clutches of generational poverty. So, Mr. Speaker, we must remember that the war on poverty declared 50 years ago is an unconditional one. As President Lyndon Baines Johnson said, our aim is not only to relieve the symptom of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. Congress must renew this commitment by extending unemployment insurance, strengthening Social Security and Medicare, raising the minimum wage, and investing in education, and above all, creating jobs. Let's work together so that one day we can say that we have won the ultimate war of our time, the war on poverty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this coming Sunday, January 19th, communities and churches across America will be celebrating the Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. Sanctity of Life Sunday is a call to defend the sanctity of human life. Since 1983, Americans have observed the Sanctity of Human Life Sunday as a day to celebrate the intrinsic value of all human life. This important day also provides an opportunity for pregnancy centers to share about the work they do to bring life-affirming resources to their communities and to empower women and men to choose life for their unborn children. Sanctity of Human Life Sunday is held on the Sunday in January that falls closest to the day in which Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton decisions were handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court on January 22, 1973. Now, I look forward to celebrating this Sanctity of Life Sunday, worshiping with the Du Bois First Baptist Church, which is located in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, an area I proudly serve and represent. For that same week, on Wednesday, January 22nd, the March for Life will be held here in Washington, D.C. What began as a small demonstration has rapidly grown to be one of the largest pro-life events in the world. The peaceful demonstration will be attended by hundreds of thousands of Americans, including many from Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. Mr. Speaker, our founders who penned our Declaration of Independence recognized this first principle as they stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life." Mr. Speaker, today we continue to live out this principle, and for all of us, protecting the unborn is a value system. It is a cause. It is a distinct understanding that every child, every human life has a purpose in this world, and that life is sacred and it must be protected. The only way to offer a voice for those who have no voice is to band together. And by educating our children and effectively communicating with our communities on the importance of life, this is how we will successfully lead this fight. Both Sanctity of Life Sunday and the March for Life are spent doing just that, celebrating life and spreading our message. Mr. Speaker, as for the right to life, Americans, born and yet to be born, deserve as much. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it is un-American that House Republicans are refusing to hold a vote on extending benefits for Americans who have worked and are now unemployed. It is particularly astounding with a speaker from Ohio, where unemployment has just ticked up, that the Republican Party refuses to bring up a vote on extending unemployment benefits. Since 1948, this is the first time that Congress has allowed extended unemployment benefits to expire with unemployment rates as high as they are. Long-term rates, especially among older workers, people who have worked their entire lives, are at the highest levels and doggedly resistant to amelioration. More than 1,300,000 Americans, including nearly 40,000 Ohioans, have lost benefits because of House Republicans. If House Republicans get their way, by the end of this year, 5 million Americans and their families will have been denied unemployment benefits. People have worked their entire lives. Speaker Boehner, that includes more than 128,000 Ohio families being denied benefits they have rightfully earned. My office has been receiving call after call from constituents who don't know why they lost their benefits and ask what they can do now. In one particular case, a woman put in the required years for her job and was ready to retire. She believed in work. She valued work. She spent her life doing it. Unfortunately, suddenly, just before she put her papers in to retire, she was laid off. She lost her job as a result of cutbacks through no fault of her own. Her husband is disabled and unable to work, and extended unemployment benefits were helping the family make ends meet. Republicans in this House took away this family's ability to pay their bills. She is now begging friends and relatives to help pay their heat bill, to keep the lights turned on, and to pay their medical bills. The uncertainty and stress this family is now facing is unfair and completely un-American. Extending unemployment benefits to people who work is not only the right thing to do, it actually is better for our economy. The Economic Policy Institute estimates if we do not extend unemployment benefits, it will cost our economy 310,000 more lost jobs because people who aren't able to hold their homes together anymore don't buy as many groceries, right? They can't pay their gas bills, they can't pay their mortgages, and they fall into poverty. Why would we want millions of more people in this country falling into poverty and creating more job loss in the nation? Creating jobs and growing our economy should be our first priority here in Congress. As Paul Krugman put it in a recent New York Times article, no matter how desperate you make the unemployed, their desperation does nothing to create more jobs. So let's come together to strengthen our economy, to stop offshoring millions and millions of jobs in this country. And let's extend unemployment benefits to the people in this country who have earned them. Until then, I urge Republicans to come on, at least allow a vote on restoring unemployment benefits to those Americans who have worked for a living and deserve the respect of this Congress. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor a great American hero, Specialist Terry K. D. Dantes Gordon, who was among 6 U.S. soldiers who passed away due to wounds suffered when their Black Hawk UH-60 helicopter went down in Afghanistan's Zabul region on December 17, 2013. Specialist Gordon was born in Shibuda, Mississippi on September 21, 1991. After graduating from Quitman High School, Gordon enlisted in the Army in the summer of 2011, fulfilling his basic training requirements at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. He then went on to complete his advanced individual training at Fort Lee, Virginia, where he became a generator mechanic. Dantes was assigned to Echo Troop, 1st Squadron, 6th Cavalry Regiment, Fort Riley, Kansas. He was later trained as a door gunner and attached to Bravo Company, 3rd Assault Helicopter Battalion, 1st Aviation Regiment. There, Specialist Gordon was tasked with firing and maintaining manually directed armament during missions, protecting the helicopter's crew members and passengers throughout the deployment to Afghanistan. Dantes Gordon loved helicopters. He knew very early on that he was meant for the Army because that's where he could fly in a Black Hawk. His family said they were surprised at first that he wasn't going into the Marine Corps like his father. But it became quite apparent that his interests were centered on going up in a helicopter. His family members were nervous, yet they realized that he loved what he was doing, and he was not afraid. Dantes loved his family, his friends, and his country. He was fortunate in that he loved what he was assigned to do, and he would talk about it any chance he got when he came home on leave with anyone who would listen. Specialist Gordon is remembered by those closest to him as always being happy, especially when he was outdoors or playing baseball. He was a practical joker, and he loved to make people laugh. His family and his community saw him as an all-around very devoted, humble, smart, and respectable young man who lost his life way too soon. He lost his life fighting for our families and for our country. And for this, our country, and particularly the state of Mississippi, will be forever grateful. Like ripples in the water, his aunt said, Dantes Gordon affected people he may have never even met, adding that the world is a better place because he was there. In an article that described the moment when Specialist Gordon's flag-draped coffin was taken off the plane at Keyfield in Meridian, Mississippi, on his final journey home, a family member observed, and I quote, "As they unloaded him off the plane, the sun peeked through the cloudy gray sky, and as they put him into the hearse, the clouds closed back up. You know, it was as if the sky opened up to pay its final respects to its beloved native Mississippi son." Specialist Gordon's awards and decorations include the Army Achievement Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Ribbon, the Afghan Campaign Medal with Campaign Star, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, the Army Service Ribbon, the Combat Action Badge, and the Aviation Badge. Specialist Gordon was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star by executive order for meritorious service from August 13, 2013 until December 17, 2011, upon which no greater honor can be demonstrated than by this ultimate sacrifice. And he will always be remembered for these actions. Dantes Gordon is survived by his parents, Terry W. Gordon of Pachuta, Mississippi, and Sabina R. Edwards of Shabuta, Mississippi, as well as his sister, Taruna Gordon, stepfather David Edwards, and two half-brothers, David Edwards and William Edwards. I was so moved at his funeral service to see what was really a celebration of his life. Mr. Speaker, I would like to leave you with a quote from Dantes' father. "Dantes was my hero long before joining the military, but now he's America's hero." How true that statement is. Dantes' love for his country and his dedication to protecting our freedoms took him from Shabuta, Mississippi to Afghanistan. Christ said in John 15:13, "Greater love hath no man than he that give his life for another." And for his courage and final sacrifice, he will never be forgotten. Thank you for this opportunity to place focus on a true American hero. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Sanchez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to lend a voice to the 1.5 million workers who have lost their federal unemployment benefits. Imagine a choice before you where you had to either put food on the table or have a roof over your head. This is the decision that millions of workers, including 53,000 people in LA County alone, will face. All because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to extend unemployment insurance benefits. Last week, I had an opportunity to talk personally with constituents who were affected by the loss of these benefits. Their message for me to send to my colleagues was clear. We are not lazy or unmotivated. We want to work. But as we continue to navigate a tough labor market, we need these benefits in order to provide for our families and to pay for the gas and phone bills that help us talk to potential employers and get ourselves to interviews. Mr. Speaker, unemployment benefits are not handouts. These are benefits workers have earned. They paid into the system to help them precisely during times like this. It's time to stop disrespecting these people who are continuing to try work by mischaracterizing them as lazy or somehow fat and happy living on unemployment benefits. One of my constituents in particular, Anthony, wanted me to make crystal clear the fact that he resents those who say that he is not trying hard enough to find a job. He has a bachelor's degree in finance from Cal State Long Beach and has worked as an accountant in the private sector. In his 47 years on earth, he has never once been unemployed until now. And he has been trying everything he can to find work, but hasn't found anything yet. He told me that every morning he gets up and goes to a work center to search the online listings, and that the 20 computers at this particular work center are always full, and every single person at one of those computers is actively looking for work. Mr. Speaker, unemployment insurance benefits are a lifeline to families who are struggling. Please don't cut off this critical lifeline. Give unemployment insurance the vote that it deserves. I thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stivers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to raise awareness of an ongoing humanitarian crisis in southern Russia and call on the State Department to respond to that crisis. In 2003, the United States State Department, responding to a humanitarian crisis against Ahiska Turks in southern Russia, designated Ahiska Turks as a special humanitarian concern for P2 processing. As a result, between 2004 and 2007, roughly 12,000 Ahiska Turks arrived in the United States as refugees and settled in over 25 states, including a sizable community in my home state of Ohio. Ahiska Turks, discriminated against, belittled, and persecuted in Russia, are model citizens in the United States. In less than a decade, they've been able to fully integrate into American society. They've learned English, adapted to their new environment, educated their children, and helped revitalize our neighborhoods. They live the American dream and strengthen American society by investing in their people in our cities. It's proven that this group is an asset to our community, as seen by the fact that over 50% of them are entrepreneurs and create jobs for others, including many Americans. Ahiska Turks have shown that refugees can thrive and live the American dream and help us grow our communities and our country. It's puzzling to me why the State Department abruptly ended this successful program. There are roughly 80,000 Ahiska Turks who remain in southern Russia in difficult circumstances. The latest report by the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance cites the adverse environment for human rights organizations to even monitor the discrimination being suffered against Ahiska Turks in southern Russia and acknowledges that the situation is very bad. I call on the State Department today to restart the P2 program and respond to this ongoing humanitarian crisis. I urge my colleagues to contact the U.S. State Department to restart the P2 program for Ahiska Turks in Russia. This is a bipartisan issue where Congress can stand up for human rights and stand up for a persecuted group. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm here today to speak about legislation that will create jobs, grow our economy, and reduce our deficit. This legislation has already passed the Senate, and the American people are still waiting for the House to do its part. I'm speaking about comprehensive immigration reform. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office predicts that over the next 10 years, fixing our broken immigration system will promote job creation and wage increases, cut the deficit by nearly $158 billion, and increase America's GDP by over $800 billion. This bill will be an economic benefit, and it's also the right thing to do for the 11 million immigrant families living in the shadows. Think about what this legislation means for those families who are facing many challenges, not unlike the difficulties earlier Irish, Italian, Portuguese, and French immigrants faced when they arrived in this great country. Diversity is a great strength of this country. We're a nation of immigrants, and our laws should reflect our values, that if you work hard and contribute to society, you can provide a life for yourself and your family. It's time to enact comprehensive immigration reform so we can create jobs, grow our economy, secure our borders, and ensure that the American dream remains a real opportunity for all future generations. The American people deserve a vote on this critical legislation, and I urge my colleagues and I urge the Speaker to bring this bill to the floor so we can fix our broken immigration system and act comprehensive immigration reform that will make a real difference not only in our economy but in the lives of millions and millions of people. I thank you and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on January 15, 2014 at 9:47 a.m. that the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 3527, that the Senate passed Senate 1434. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Now, pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House to be in recess until noon today.
The House back at noon Eastern for legislative work. Just one bill to be considered today, the Omnibus Spending Bill, providing money to keep the federal government